I mean, it makes me happy to hear that because I'm trying to be the safest, safest pilot possible. Hey everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of the Runway to Success with my co-host Mikaela Rivera. And I'm going to be honest, like I'm really excited today because I've got kind of a personal connection to Christian. Christian Leibold, he is a certified flight instructor, plus a man of extensive backgrounds in other areas as well. But Christian is actually my own personal flight instructor. So super excited to have him on the podcast today. Hopefully he won't, tell too many horror stories about my training so far. But Christian, say hello. Kind of share a little bit about yourself to start.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, Trey, Mikaela. Thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here chatting with you guys this morning. So yeah, Christian Leibold. Great job getting the last name correct. It doesn't happen very often. So we moved here to Nashville in 2019, July of 2019, from Charleston, South Carolina, where I grew up. So that was just a move based on an opportunity to take a new role with my non-aviation job at the time. So that's what got us here, and now I'm a busy flight instructor. So that's where we're at.
So you're not just a busy flight instructor. I know you've got three rescue dogs. Obviously,
right.
You're a husband, but you've also achieved quite a few different certifications in a rather short time frame, if I'm not mistaken. Can you walk through all the different certifications that you have and
Certainly.
Some background there?
Yeah, so starting with obviously private pilot, and then from there, so this was just supposed to be sort of a personal box to check in the beginning, right? Something I kind of always wanted to do. So private pilot in 2022, flew around on my own for about a year, just doing my own cross country trips, go to lunch, go fly from point A to B and back for no good reason other than just to do it. And so about a year or so into that, I decided to get my instrument rating just to become a more competent, safer pilot. Had really stayed close to aviation, just immersing myself with podcasts and YouTube videos and staying in the aviation, news space and whatnot. And really about halfway through the instrument rating, decided to sort of make a little bit of a change there. I know we'll talk about that coming up, but so instrument into certified flight instructor, and then from there commercial, then certified flight instructor, then multi-engine instructor, and finally CFII, so the ability to teach instruments. So I think that's six check rides at this point, and more to come in the future. But I think I'm taking a break on check rides.
if you had a business card, there'd be a lot of initials after your name.
Yes.
Is what you're saying?
Alphabet soup. Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Christian, obviously I don't get to fly with you like Trey. What drew you to aviation in the beginning?
Sure. A bit of a typical story. So when I was much younger, a young kid, obviously I was always drawn to airplanes. I thought they were really cool. I thought the ability to take flight was pretty awesome. And so we would take maybe family trips, and I'm sitting there on the airplane, listening to what the airplane is doing, watching the flaps move up and down as I look out the window, and just really kind of mentally tracking the entire flight. So that was just always sort of a childhood interest that I had. I took it a step further, graduating high school, and went to an A&P program at the local tech school in South Carolina, the technical college there. So that taught me a lot about airplane systems, how they function, how they work, the technical aspects of what goes on inside an aircraft to make it fly and keeping it maintained and safe. And so I think just through virtue of talking so much about airplanes, that's how I ended up with my first discovery flight as a gift from my parents. I think it was a birthday gift. So that kicked that off initially. Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, Trey.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so you got kicked off from a discovery flight. Now we have alphabet soup after your name with all these additional certifications. For people who maybe don't know, they've never attempted a discovery flight, they don't understand what a CFI does. What's a day-to-day like for you right now as a certified flight instructor?
Of course, yeah, great question. So my schedule is very much determined by the learner or the student. I'll probably use those terms interchangeably. The FAA prefers the term learner. So we have an online scheduling system that's extremely intuitive. So the people that I fly with find a block of time where I'm available and an aircraft is available, and they book it. Sometimes it happens on short notice, less than 24 hours in advance, and that's totally okay. That's another benefit. I'm able to kind of control my own schedule. So if I need some time for a personal event, a dentist, doctor, or whatever, then I can just block that time off. So we're staying busy. We're flying a lot. When I'm not in the air, I'm having to open up my student notebook. Everyone is on a different phase, right? So right now I've got a handful of mostly people on their private pilot journey, and then they're all at a different state in their learning, whether it's pre-solo or post-solo. Now we're moving on to cross-country training. And then I have a handful of folks that I'm teaching out of our Piper Aztec, our multi-engine trainer. So they're working on their multi-engine certificate. And so with everyone being in a different place, I can't lose sight of where each individual is uniquely in their training path. So I have to open up the binder, make my notes, and do my best to come up with a game plan so that folks aren't wondering, well, I try my best to make sure it's not a surprise when we show up on training day to go fly. What are we going to do? Hopefully I've made time to give you that as a heads up so you can study, get the nose in the books for an hour or two before we go fly. So there's always something to do, whether we're in the airplane or not.
So I'm curious, like, obviously I'm sitting left seat, you're sitting right seat. My own background, I grew up around aviation, but I imagine, people coming to train with you, they have a variety of backgrounds, right? Maybe some of them have never even been in a small airplane before, which obviously makes, that discovery flight, super critical. I know, Mikaela, you did one of those yourself before deciding to fly. I haven't asked you, and I've been kind of thinking about like this question a lot. How do you get the courage to get in the plane with all of these people who may or may not have any training whatsoever, and you just kind of hand the stick over to them, and in a lot of ways trust them with your life? Like how do you deal with that?
That's a great question. And, I think it comes down to not everybody realizes this. People think that for example, if the engine stops turning, that the airplane just kind of drops out of the sky like a brick. And thankfully for us, that's not the case, right? We can make it back down if something were to go wrong. And I also have to just trust my own abilities and make sure that we do a thorough briefing on the ground. If you become uncomfortable, ill, sick in any way, if something doesn't seem right, please, let's talk about that. I'll take the controls. And most importantly, please don't freeze up. Please don't lock up on the controls. And, I'll have the ability to get us back down safely. So that's sort of how I attempt to comfort someone who may be feeling a little bit uneasy. Maybe some folks had no intention of flying, but they were given a discovery flight as a gift, and now maybe they feel obligated to use it. But most people are, maybe I've only had one experience like that, but most people are genuinely excited and thrilled that we're taking flight for their first time.
Well, I know, go ahead.
I was going to say full disclosure on my discovery flight with Chris. I didn't know I was going to be the one actually flying the plane. I looked at him and was like, "Wait, you want me to throw the throttle?" Oh, okay.
Threw you right in there. Yep.
Threw me right in there. Whole new world, whole new ball game. So you really do have to have a lot of courage in yourself, and that communication, I think, with the student is really critical to kind of establish what are the ground rules for how we successfully navigate this flight.
Absolutely.
Well, you have, a unique story that I think there's a large population of aviators that can relate to this, and maybe some that are, even considering making a change later in life as well. And so, I know kind of if we rewind back to 2011, and maybe even a little bit later, I know that, through our own conversations, you had some start and stops, right? Like you soloed a few times, and then you kind of, life gets in the way, you started again. What really, when you think back to the past, like what kind of got in the way of you following that aviation journey to where you are today? And are there any lessons that you would share with anybody else out there?
Sure. I was at a different phase of life at the time. I was working a regular job. I absolutely wanted to continue and get my private pilot certificate, but unfortunately, I didn't prioritize it like I should have. And it's hindsight's 2020. If I could go back and do things differently, I would. But I was working a regular job. I was only flying on weekends. You can make that work, but it's not ideal. For as far as proficiency goes, you want to try and fly 2-3 times a week if you can. And so, all it takes with that cadence is 1 or 2 weather cancellations, 1 or 2 maintenance events, and next thing you know, it's been 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, and you haven't gone to fly. So that's obviously a huge setback. So to tie all that together, I did end up making it to my first solo. Well, a day I'll never forget throughout my entire life. But I think I soloed once more after that, and then I just allowed other things to just kind of consume, the rest of my time. Right, my job, other life events. Naturally, my CFI is not going to let me continue to go solo if he hasn't seen me in a month, right? Because he knows the proficiency's not there. And back then, I allowed some frustrations to creep in, and just kind of let it fall off. I can't go back and think of the day that I decided not to keep scheduling, but at some point it just happened, and we just lost contact, and that was that. And a decade later, that's how long it took me to get back into it. So, yeah, that's kind of how I fell off.
I think a lot of things, like Mikaela and I've talked about this because, on a personal journey myself, I waited probably 20 plus years longer than I initially thought I would in my own flight training. I can remember, I can remember 1985, I think is when Top Gun came out, and I went to the theater and I watched it with my dad, and I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I want to be a pilot. And I'd imagine, there were a lot of younger aged people who probably felt the same way after seeing Top Gun the first time. And so I thought through high school, okay, well, hey, I need to flying's an investment, right? So I need to make sure I've got enough money to pay for it. And then you get into college, and then to your point, life happens. And so I think, for a lot of people with your own experience going through this process, is there any advice that you'd give to somebody who's maybe been putting off flight training, or thinking, oh, I'll wait for X, Y, and Z? What advice would you give them?
No time like the present. You're not going to find schools are busy right now. You're not going to find a flight school that's short on CFIs because, folks that want to take the commercial route, everyone knows, and I think everyone agrees that flight instructing is a very good path, right, to get to where you want to go towards your next step in your career, right? And so flight schools, should be taking you on as a student, and at least get that discovery flight in and see how you feel about it. The other thing is, before you do that, make sure that you're going to set aside the personal resources, right? The time and the finances to make sure you're ready to do it, because there's nothing worse to kind of halt your progression than we've taken 5 lessons. Maybe you've made it to solo like I did, and then you decide that now I'm out of time. Now I'm out of the funds to continue this, right? So now, I don't want to say it was wasted, but it's gonna really hurt, personally, to not be able to continue that journey. And then if you do decide to pick it up a year or 2 later, now you're kind of starting over, because it's not like riding a bike.
That's true. I mean, I know, Mikaela, you and I've had this conversation. We were flying, and I think you hit you shared maintenance or weather. Some of those factors played a role. I took a vacation, and that first flight back in, and I think it was a total of 2 weeks. It just felt like, oh my gosh, like it felt like you were taking a step or 2 back to kind of get back in the swing of things. Yep. Wouldn't you agree, Mikaela?
Yeah, I am sitting in the working on not being frustrated this week phase, because we made a personal decision to take a very much needed pause and a break. But leading into that, we had a maintenance situation. So the last flight, I didn't get to fly. And then now one of the planes is down for maintenance. So the accessibility to the aircraft is limited. And I'm like, I'm going to go another 2 weeks before I can fly again. I'm going to be so far behind Trey. And we haven't gotten there to the good news about Trey. But I'm like, dang it. I'm pissed about that. But I'm like, we're on our own path. right? But I could see how this could snowball, and I could very easily be like, maybe I'll put this off until 2026 because we constantly have things happening with the business or, friends, trips, whatever it is popping up that make it very easy to put the lessons on the back burner. And then all you're doing is setting yourself up for a much longer journey, which pulls more resources, requires more support, and a lot more patience for that journey. I'm curious for you, you're married. Obviously, Trey and I are partners in life and in business. For you, what's been your wife's appetite and interest around aviation and this whole journey for you?
Oh, great question. My wife and I have flown together. She's come to fly with me. I can count on one hand the number of times that she's come to fly with me, right? And she continues to warm up to it. A lot of it is just scheduling and time. She's also extremely busy with her career. And so maybe when the weekends come around, that would be the only time that she has to fly. Well, guess what? Now I'm flying with students and with Trey, exactly. and so that kind of limits our ability. And then maybe her preference might be to just relax on the weekend and not go do something stressful like getting up in a tiny airplane, right? With what some would call maybe the equivalent of a lawnmower engine and go fly. But I applaud her for stepping outside of her comfort zone and flying with me when she has, because for someone who might be kind of a nervous flyer in small planes, she's done a great job being my co-pilot in those scenarios.
So do you wait for like the fall and winter when it's a little bit smoother air to bring her up there? So
yeah, the smooth air, and then also it can be a little bit. It can take people back when they realize that we don't have real air conditioning. So until we get up above 3,000 feet, we're going to be in there sweating during the summertime, and that's just the way it is, and we have to deal with it. So for passenger comfort, I highly recommend spring, fall, absolutely.
Yeah, that was something that I didn't see on like the training lookouts, like starting flight training in August. Be aware of 110 degrees in the cockpit.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that was definitely not in the guidebook. But I'm glad we did it because you're nervous already. So anybody else listening and watching, I'm a nervous sweater. If you're a nervous sweater and you get into a plane that's a tiny tin can, and it's a 110 degree index, there's nothing dry at all. But now I appreciate the 80-degree days so much, and I can't wait until it's 70 degrees or 50 degrees and we're flying. But yeah, the 110 degrees in the summer was a pretty wild time to decide to get in the cockpit. Yep. That's for sure.
Can be a lot.
Well, so we talked about having the proper support system. You obviously have led, you started in your community college going the A&P route, right? I think you subsequently, if not mistaken, you graduated from Embry-Riddle, didn't you?
So I did get my degree from Embry-Riddle. That was in a technical science degree specializing in logistics. So I actually did not go the aviation route there. So, I am certainly proud of my Embry-Riddle degree, and I do hope that it will be helpful to me on a resume at some point in the future. However, I didn't take the aviation route there. It was a technical degree. So, but hopefully it'll be a feather in my cap at some point.
Well, so, you went down a different career path, right? So now it's aviation. We'll get to more about that here in a moment, but what career path did you end up, going down? And as you kind of reflect as, an adult, experienced professional, are there really any skills that you think that you've taken away from that experience that are going to help you in aviation and in your career down the road?
Sure. Well, to start, my non-aviation experience, I sort of fell into the path of logistics, MRO and spare parts work in the automotive industry. A lot of that had to do with my dad. He worked in that same field, and so through various connections, I was able to sort of take an entry level role many years ago in that type of space, and then sort of moved on and progressed from there. The company in South Carolina that moved us here to Nashville, With them, I was a facility manager at a car plant down there in Ridgeville, South Carolina. Had an opportunity to move to Nashville to become a project and launch services manager for our project and engineering team. And so that's been my non-aviation path. And as far as the skills transfer goes, I learned a lot about. I've had to train many people on how to perform a task, how to follow a process, how to execute a procedure. I've had to update personnel training records, understanding the importance of record keeping and having that documentation on file. And so I think that's transferred into an organized approach to flight training, making sure that I do have that. Everything is electronic these days, and a lot of that is great, but I still carry around the binder that I talked about at the beginning of the show here in my backpack. It travels with me when I'm flying. So I've always got those paper records of what we've worked on, what we've trained on. And so I think the importance of that is a big transfer, as well as the ability to sense when someone is understanding a point and maybe when they're not getting it. And do I need to go find another path to kind of make the light bulb come on?
So something we haven't talked about is, so you've brought these skills forward. It wasn't a waste, all of this professional experience that you had. You've brought it forward. What are your goals right now with aviation?
Sure. So for now, I am along for the ride. I want to be the best flight instructor that I can be, and I don't say that in sort of a cliche term. I think there's many different ways to get to the time requirements that you need to move on to the next phase of an aviation career. It's not just flight instructing. However, based on my past experience that, like I just mentioned, working with people, I kind of thought, I might be pretty good at this. Maybe I can teach safe, competent pilots, and that was exciting to me. It is exciting to me because there's unfortunately a lot of events, almost daily, it seems like, in the news about general aviation airplane and commercial, but GA airplanes. It's almost every day. There's some incidents. Pilots are dying, and the NTSB reports are showing. Bad decision making, pilot error. It's almost never the airplane's fault. It's almost never the airplane came apart or the engine stopped or something. It's usually pilot error. So, where does that start? It starts with training. And if I can make a positive impact there and try and go above and beyond the bare minimum standards, and make good, safe pilots, then I think that's a worthwhile, goal to fulfill.
Absolutely.
It makes me happy to hear that, because I'm trying to be the safest pilot possible
too. So I want to make it back down safely. So
right
in this game.
Well, that's something. I mean, you hit on something. General aviation. It's definitely more popular. I think maybe the most popular it's ever been. I feel in a way. While accessibility is still a challenge, it is becoming more accessible to people of all ages and backgrounds. In part of those challenges, I'm with you. It seems like every day there's a headline or a news article about something somewhere. And even with all of those headlines, it's still a safer mode of travel than even getting in your car and driving across country. And so when you think about how aviation can grow and improve into the future with training, do you have any thoughts on for students like myself, Mikaela, those considering flight training? What are some things that you think can be done to help increase safety within general aviation as a whole?
That's a great question. I think technology has changed a lot, even over the past decade. If I think back to when I started my first bit of training in 2011, there was no. I don't think the iPad even existed, much less any sort of apps on a phone or anything that wasn't just part of the airplane, right? Like an old Garmin 430 or whatever the early GPS options might have been. Like that's what you had, and everything was paper nav logs. And fast forward to today, and we're flying with our iPads and EFBs. And those are tools that are incredible for situational awareness and incredible for making sure that you have the information that you need in flight. something as simple as the next frequency coming up so you can stay ahead of the airplane. Having that moving map, I think that's great. However, I still think it's important to train what I would call the old-fashioned way, right? So let's put the iPad away when we're doing our cross-country training, and let's fill out a paper nav log. And we're going to use our flight computer, and it's going to suck. And you're going to be like, why are we doing this? Because we just spent 2 hours making this nav log, and popular EFB can do it in 3 seconds. Well, we'll get to that. Let's understand these critical concepts so that when you blast off, right, when you get your private pilot certificate and you blast off out of your local airport, and for whatever happens, you lose all of your electronic equipment, are you just going to freak out, or are you going to go back to your training and know where to point the nose of your airplane to get somewhere safe, back to home base or the next closest airport? So I think integrating the old and the new, I hope everyone still continues to do that in their flight instruction. That's certainly my plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's to hit on one point real quick. One of the things that I've learned through my brief 20 something hours of flight training is that things happen very quickly, right? And when things happen quickly, you revert back to your training. You revert back to the things you've done consistently. And so it's just something I always have in the back of my mind of, okay, how can I continue to train even when I'm not in the plane, right? How am I training on the ground that will better suit me for when I'm in the air should something come up?
Of course. Absolutely. And I think, going back a few minutes ago to what Mikaela mentioned about being off for a couple of weeks due to a significant maintenance event or going on a personal trip or whatever the case may be. Well, what can you do on the ground? Like stay in aviation, right? There's always ground studies to do, right? You're preparing for a check ride, and there's going to be a 3-ish hour oral portion of that check ride. So stay in the books, right? Do what you can as long as your schedule permits to continue studying and stay in it so that you've got that motivation and excitement to get back in the plane when you're ready.
So when did you first start instructing?
I started instructing beginning of this year in January. I guess I had my first full-time student probably in February.
Of 2025. So February 2025, first time with this student. Mm-hmm. What's been one of the most memorable experiences for you with this student?
I'll pick a high and a low. Starting with the low, probably at first, quote unquote, scary experience. And I know Mikaela, you and Trey are flying the Diamond aircraft. But imagine you intended to pull the throttle back to idle, but you reached over one too many and you pulled the red knob all the way back. Mm-hmm. The mixture knob. Well, what's that going to do? It's going to stop the engine eventually, right?
Yep.
Now, at the end of the day, as long as everything else is working fine, you push that knob back up quickly and everything should come right back on. But that happened, and that got the heart rate up a little bit. But we caught it. And then the most memorable experience, I think this was an easy one, his first solo. So that's pretty cool.
That same student?
Same student. That's right. A few months later, and it wasn't easy. We had to do a lot of very focused landing practice, and that's okay. And eventually, it got to the point where I got out of the airplane, and I'm thinking, have I done this right? Have I given him the tools he needs to be successful? And at the end of the day, it went great. And so, whether it's him or whether it was any of my future students, like Trey recently, when they get back after a few laps in the pattern and pull up in the airplane and shut it down and open the canopy, just that look of accomplishment and excitement on their faces is incredibly rewarding.
So for the listeners, Trey, we are 2 days past his first solo flying a plane. I got emotional when I saw the videos. I mean, because this has been a dream of his. He's not exaggerating. This has been a dream of his for his whole life.
Sure.
And for me, he asked me, I don't know, a week or so ago about kind of my journey with it. And I am excited to get my license as much to be able to be available and competent to manage an emergency in a plane. I see Trey as like the pilot in the family because we always thought this was going to happen. But also I want to see Chris's face Like, boy, has he been putting up with all kinds of things coming out of my mouth when I'm up in the air, navigating my nerves, trying to get the landings, being extremely hard on myself. And I can't wait to land the plane for the first time solo and go over to Chris and be like, you did it, man. You taught me, this person, how to fly. Like, that has to be such a rewarding feeling as an instructor.
Yeah. How cool is that? And you mentioned Chris, side note, Chris got me, I worked with Chris to get my commercial certificate. So on the road in between instrument to commercial, you've got to have that 250 hours minimum in Part 61, and I worked with Chris on that. So I know that he's an excellent, competent instructor. So that's going to be a major accomplishment for you guys.
Yeah, can't wait.
Yeah, it's again, for those of you that have been thinking about it, or those of you who've gone through flight training, you all remember your first solo. That happened to me just a couple days ago. I couldn't have asked for better weather. Winds were relatively calm. The sun was setting. Shout out to Christian. He got some awesome videos, a great photo. Without question, somebody asked me, like, how would you rate this in terms of like life goals and accomplishments? It's a top fiver. Hands down, like top five accomplishment. And it might even be the top three, but it's something that I'm just I think all three of us were passionate about aviation at different levels and have different interests, but I think it's something that also brings a lot of people together too, right? It is a community. And so you mentioned a moment ago that you were training with Chris to get your commercial. When you think of the alphabet soup at the end of your name, what was the most challenging certification to attain?
Yeah, it's going to have to be Certified Flight Instructor, and rightfully so. If you take a look at the Airman Certification Standards for CFI, there's a lot of pages in there because it's a culmination of maneuvers, right? CFIs have to do maneuvers to a higher standard, and maneuvers that at the private pilot level you don't even know exist yet. There's things that happen in commercial, like lazy eights and chandelles and steep spirals, that are not even part of the private pilot vernacular at this point. So you have to learn that in the airplane, and then on the ground you need to be very familiar with complex concepts and then be able to teach them, right? So now we're talking about the FOI, the fundamentals of instruction. And so that ends up being, a day-long event to go do that check ride. So it's just a grilling oral portion on the ground, demonstrating to the examiner that you can teach. You get out the little model airplane and you get on the whiteboard and you start drawing things out to help describe what you're trying to teach. And then you have to go demonstrate the ability to teach in the airplane, right? So the examiner is going to pretend to be a bad student pilot and try to put you into stalls and weird places, and you have to take the controls and fix it. So it's a long day. There's a lot leading up to it, making the lesson plans that you have to demonstrate and show, and then going to do the check ride. But once it's done, it's a big day. So yeah, to answer your question, that was the most difficult one so far.
So I'm curious, for anybody listening, Christian's here in Nashville, and you teach at Frequency Change. That's where we're students. What makes that the right fit for you in terms of becoming an instructor? Because there are a lot of other schools in the area that you could have gone to.
Sure. No, the easy answer to that is I got all my ratings through Frequency Change, with the exception of one. But all of my other ratings were through Frequency Change. So I know how things are done. I know the system. I know most of the instructors. I know the owner. But the honest answer is, because of that, I was able to understand the culture. And so through my after my private pilot certificate, I had dealings with other flight schools in the area. I would go get checked out as a renter so that I could just fly my own cross countries, like I mentioned earlier, and was exposed to some things that are, just a little bit different. And, without trying to expose too much or throw anyone under the bus, that's not my goal here. But the culture at FCA is such that the instructors take this seriously. No one on staff at FCA is to build time and move on. Is time building a great side effect of being a flight instructor? Yes, of course it is. But for now, for the current time while we're here, we're going to do the best that we can, whether it's me or any of the folks that I work with, to produce good, safe pilots. And that's what really drew me to make frequency change the first contact. The day after I completed my CFI tech ride, hey, do you guys have room for me on the schedule? And I was blessed and thankful to have been able to make that happen.
Well, it's we've hit on it that this has been a career change for you, right? And anytime that you make a change in a career, it's never easy. Change, period, isn't easy, but especially when you're making a large pivot in a career. What gave you the confidence to make that call and move into aviation?
Sure. I'm the type of person who I tend to just kind of stick with the status quo. So it goes back to that support structure. My wife, it was a major part of this. So going back to halfway through instrument training, realizing that I really like this. As far as my non-aviation career goes, I work with incredible people that I admire, people that taught me so much and provided me the skill sets in business and in life to also be a great pilot. But if I compare the two and I ask myself the question, are you as satisfied or are you as passionate about the non-aviation career as you are when you're in the airplane? And, the honest answer is no. Not really. So then it's like, well, I think my wife had mentioned at one point, could you see yourself instructing? This was a couple of years back. And I was like, I don't, my thought was still, this is just a hobby. How can I do this? Right. And then it starts to become a little more real where I start doing my research and I try to talk myself out of it every step of the way. Am I already too old for this? How can I possibly start over? Right. Like, I'm 36 years old, it makes me cringe to say it. That's, half a lifetime basically, so it's like, well, how can I possibly make this work? And my wife is the type of person who, when we were in South Carolina and I told her that I just got off the phone with my boss and I told her that I've just got a job offer to go to Nashville, I kid you not, her words were, when do we go? And I commend her for that. Like that's our dynamic. I probably would still be in South Carolina if it wasn't for her. And so to answer your question, she, promoted and pushed me and gave me that motivation to really look into it and really find out what it would take. And so here we are today. And so I'm obviously forever thankful to her for that, to have that support.
I don't know if it's Warren Buffett. I'm pretty sure it's Warren Buffett. He talks about the single most important decision that you can make in your life is who you spend it with, who you choose to marry. And I think that's a great example, having a partner who supports you in your goals and your dreams and your aspirations, who says, when do we start packing, basically,
Exactly.
to those things. It makes it easier. Would you say that it makes it easier to make those types of decisions?
Of course. I was, like I mentioned, I was just dead set against, there's no way I can make this work. I mean, I've flown commercially quite a bit and, the first officers are kids. I'm not a kid anymore. So how does that work? So then I started to kind of think about this and, with the professional career that I have had, that's gotta be worth something, right? At some point when I go sit down for an interview in the future, that professional and life experience, I hope it counts for something, right? Obviously, first and foremost, you have to qualify from the experience perspective. But if it comes down to my resume and someone else's resume and experience wise, as far as hours and ratings, they're the same. I hope that mine stands out just because of the other things that I've done, right? And the ability to work with people and train and just having those added life lessons. So that's what my fingers are crossed for.
So right now you're enjoying the journey of teaching, and your goal is to be a part of bringing more safe pilots into the air. Where do you see your journey in aviation heading next? Have you set another big milestone for yourself?
I guess the next big milestone from a ratings perspective would be airline transport pilot. So the ATP certificate. But I'm in no rush now. I have to qualify for it, right? So I'm going to have a bit of a ways to go and just continue instructing. And I'm not the type of person who wants to constantly stay up with, for example, the pilot groups on Facebook and the aviation career. I stay out of that because it's the doom and gloom, right? When it's good, it's great, and when it's bad, it's awful. And I don't want to get in a negative headspace with that, because who knows what the industry is going to be like when I get there, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So along for the ride, I'm thinking about what's ahead of me a day at a time, and we'll go where we need to go when I get there.
I love that. I mean, you're spot on. I mean, again, you're taking a different approach that I think a lot of students, I say students, early aviators take. They have their eyes set on one path and one path only. But I think that in aviation today, there's so many different paths that you can take, right? Like, whether it's the commercial route that you talked about, there's obviously cargo, there's part 135 or part 90. I mean, there's part 190 or 91. Like, there's all these different avenues that you can take. And there are plenty I haven't even mentioned yet. And so when you think about like somebody who is starting their aviation journey, somebody who's maybe sitting in the same seat as you, maybe somebody who's coming up on that magic number, right? Those 1,500 hours, which when I was considering becoming a professional pilot, it was only 250 hours, I think is what the limit was back in the day. But when for somebody that you hit on a little bit earlier, but is there another piece of advice that you'd give anyone right now that's considering an aviation career?
I'd say, yeah, I mean, if you're starting from ground zero, at least do yourself the favor of getting the private pilot and go from there. If you make it through private pilot training and you decide maybe this isn't for you, you've still earned a valuable, life-changing skill set. Even if you never fly again, just having gone through that process. And you guys, Trey and Mikaela, you'll see that as well by the time you get your certificate and you're holding that piece of paper in your hand from the examiner. It is life-changing, and it changes the way that you think about things, and it changes the way that you approach everyday life. In my personal opinion, I believe that to be the case. So I would say, please figure out how to get your private pilot certificate, and then take it from there.
So for any of our listeners that are looking to connect with you, how could they do that? Where could they find you?
Oh, please, I would love to connect on LinkedIn. I have a fairly uncommon last name, so I'll be easy to find there. But I would love to connect with you guys and your listeners as well.
Awesome. Christian, thank you so much for joining us on the Runway to Success. Great insights on aviation, flight instruction. And obviously, if you're local in the Nashville area and you want to connect with Christian as your flight instructor, you can reach out to him at Frequency Change to get in contact with him. But we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Christian.
Thank you. Bye.